This project is more like a scientific experiment than it is like a curated exhibition. And what I mean by that is this. I had a question, a philosophical one really, about the contemporary criterion for aesthetic decision-making. What I wondered is the basis at the close of the 20th century for choosing or valuing one artwork over another. In other words, what are the criteria for judging? My hypothesis for this experiment is that we've entered an era distinct from both modernism and postmodernism. Modernism from Courbet onward was driven by the engine of the avant-garde, with the revolution of each movement overthrowing its precursor with almost mechanistic determinism. You know, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, the Fauves, the Cubists, the Dadaists. We all know the story. And it's really only a footnote to the larger story of social and economic progress, i.e. things will always get better. Well, this changed in the 1960s. Many contemporary historians have placed Venturi's book as the beginning of the postmodern movement, and it's certainly true that the architects were the first to articulate the simultaneous usage of heretofore mutually exclusive styles. Its translation into the visual arts of painting and sculpture was seen as a series of neos, existing simultaneously in a temporal sense, but not in the same work. Neo-expressionism, neo-conceptualism, done in the format established by Duchamp, neo-surrealism, etc. Even movements like minimalism, which claimed some originality, did so, I would maintain, falsely. Malevich set out the vocabulary completely at the beginning of the century, and the artists who gained prominence in the 1960s really only reiterated an already invented form. Reiteration is an accurate description. It is the key to postmodernism, for in postmodernism it is that adherence to already established styles that granted easy access and interpretation for the art world. The world knew what expressionism meant. It was codified, classified, and easily recognized. It knew what conceptualism was, or Dadaism's reincarnation as Fluxist art, just like it knew what plain old-fashioned realism was. The debates that arose over the decades of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and much of the 90s was about the competing values inherent in each of those styles. For example, some curators or critics simply liked the dry intellectual nature of conceptual art and disliked the emotionalism of expressionism, or vice versa. My point is this: the lines were drawn a priori to the making of the art, and the criterion for judging was fairly clear. Each style had its own language and baggage, and all you had to do was pick up the suitcase and go. My sense is that this no longer holds to be true. Aesthetic boundaries overlap, styles are more mixed, and idiosyncratic art is more the rule than the exception. There is a new freedom of expression that artists have laid claim to, and few march on the beaten path of neo-movements. But if this is so, then what forms the basis for evaluative decisions? If the artists have thrown off the shackles of postmodernism's categories, on what basis do the curators and critics make their choices? Is it some yet-to-be-defined notion of quality, or is it personal preference, or are there theoretical or political theories that are being exemplified? In order to answer this question, I formulated an experiment which presents a control group of 24 Brooklyn artists, good artists all, but selected with as blind an eye to style as possible. In other words, I tried to be as objective as possible, not choosing work on the basis of my preferences, but considering work that others respected and trying to give as broad a range of choice as possible. I let each artist choose which piece they would like to be represented by, so again trying to preserve some notion of objectivity. I then chose 4 curators from New York City: Rob Storr from MoMA, Lynn Cook from Dia, Leah Gunn-Gitano from the Thread Waxing Space, and Lydia Yee from the Bronx Museum, and asked them to choose a subset of work, i.e. 8 to 10 to 12 artworks from the original 24, which I gave to them in the version of slides. The point is obvious. You, the viewer, get to see not only what a particular curator chooses, but more important, what is not chosen. This never happens in real life. You also get to see what different curators choose, and the comparisons here are also fascinating. But my hope is more of a theoretical nature. I hope that this exercise will give insight into the art world's criterion for judging art. In this emerging world, free from the constraints of formulistic styles, how do we decide? Or to phrase it in this way, in a post-style world, how do we see? And so, dear CD-ROM viewer, have fun clicking.